Hello and welcome to your Newsmax Daily for Monday, March the 24th, 2025, the 83rd day of the year and World Tuberculosis Day. Bringing attention to the potentially fatal disease that primarily affects the lungs, March 24th, 1882 is the day the bacteria causing tuberculosis was discovered. And 100 years later, 1982, the World Health Organization, the WHO, established March 24th as World TB Day. On the food calendar, today is National Cheesesteak Day. Not sure exactly why, but there you go. Celebrate with a cheesesteak for lunch or dinner. It's also a very busy World News Monday, as U.S. diplomats met with Russian delegates in Saudi Arabia about ending the 3-year war in Ukraine. The U.S. met with Ukrainian officials last night, Sunday night, who signaled a willingness to accept a 3-day truce, but as of this morning, Moscow representatives are demanding more concessions. This will be a developing story throughout the day. And as usual, President Trump had an event-filled weekend, as opposed to the previous president who spent most weekends resting, right? Newsmax White House correspondent Mike Carter had the privilege of traveling with the president this weekend. He is on the tarmac next to Air Force One in this segment. So the sound is a little bit rough, but he conveniently recaps most of the weekend headlines.
President Trump in Philadelphia this evening on his way to the NCAA Wrestling Championships. White House correspondent Mike Carter is standing by with the very latest. There you are, Mike. I see the Trump's plane in the background. Some exciting stuff.
Yeah, Lydia, this is what we call a dream live shot in this business. The president here at his local country club in Bedminster, New Jersey, just a few miles away from here. He'll be arriving here within the hour. He won't be alone heading down to Philadelphia tonight. He'll be joined by Elon Musk, Senator from Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick, and Jim Jordan. Both Jim Jordan and Dave McCormick, both college wrestlers. Dave McCormick wrestling at West Point, and Jim Jordan, of course, at Wisconsin. He was a two-time national champion, by the way. So President very much eager to get down to Philadelphia and see some good fashion wrestling tonight, college wrestling. Of course, he was at the Super Bowl earlier this year, the Daytona 500. And Donald Trump is he likes his sports, doesn't he? But there's a lot of news coming out of the Trump administration here overnight. The president announcing that more deportations are on the way when it comes to the Trump administration, now revoking the legal status of 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Caroline Leavitt saying about the administration's move, these are the 530,000 illegal migrants that Joe Biden flew into the United States on the taxpayers' dime. They're welcome to self-deport using the newly repurposed CBP Home app. And those migrants will have until April 24th before the federal government starts making that happen. Overnight, President Trump issuing a memorandum rescinding security clearances and access to classified information for several high-profile individuals. Trump saying, quote, I have determined that it is no longer in the national interest for the following individuals to access classified information, among them Anthony Blinken, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Hillary Clinton, Liz Cheney, Kamala Harris, Adam Kinzinger, President Biden, and his entire family. Well, what is it like to fly on Air Force One, you might be wondering. We just did it for the first time last night. They give you food. They give you M&Ms with the presidential seal on it, by the way, Lydia. And if you don't like milk chocolate, well, they have peanut M&Ms as well. I'm going to step out of the way real quick. This is actually probably not the Air Force One you're typically used to seeing. This is a Boeing 757, the typical big Air Force One that is made classic in a lot of news and movies. That's the 747. This is the same version that Trump Force One, Donald Trump's private airplane, is. It's a smaller airplane. We do have Dave McCormick, the senator, is already on that airplane, and in just a few minutes we will be expecting Elon Musk and President Trump to arrive as we make our way down to Philadelphia tonight for some wrestling, college wrestling, and we'll be bringing you live coverage of that. We'll have some tape coverage tomorrow morning on Newsmax. Lydia?
Newsmax White House correspondent Mike Carter, and we're going to hear more from Lydia Serrani in a few minutes. But I mentioned the former president going into that segment, not only because President Biden didn't do much of anything on the weekends other than maybe sleep on the beach instead of sleep at home, but also because we are now 2 months removed from Inauguration Day, and there's almost no trace of Joe.
Welcome back to America Right Now. I'm Tom Basile. In one of the most iconic moments of Inauguration Day, Joe Biden boarded a Marine helicopter on the east front of the U.S. Capitol and lifted off, leaving Washington behind after a half century. He boarded an Air Force jet. He and the former First Lady headed off to the 8,000-acre estate of Democrat mega-donor Joe Kiani. And America's 46th president hasn't been seen since. Where's Joe? Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I'm not missing the angry speeches that demonize more than half the country.
The Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
I'm also not missing moments like this.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to
Or this.
Biden!
Ho, ho, ho! Happy Independence Day!
Ho, ho, ho. Happy Independence Day. But in our digital age, in our social media obsessed society, over the past 2 months, no photos, no video of he and Jill out at dinner in Delaware or California. No video of him cruising around on a nice day in that famous green Corvette of his. No walks on the beach. Nothing. Is Joe Biden becoming the new Howard Hughes? This is important. In the days since he left office, we're learning more and more about just how much the Biden presidency was a scam. Now, we knew he was napping during the day. We knew that the White House was evasive about the president's condition or the medications that he was on. We knew that Democrat advocates in the press and congressional leaders covered it all up. Revelations about the White House staff's use of an auto pen to sign documents, including executive orders and pardons, has raised new questions about Biden's involvement in the day-to-day administration of the nation's affairs. Here's Mike Johnson with one example of where staff may have made a unilateral decision concerning our energy policy, or a shocking example of the senility of the commander-in-chief.
Sir, why did you pause LNG exports to Europe? He looks at me stunned with this, and he said, I didn't do that. And I said, Mr. President, yes, you did. It was an executive order. Oh, you talk about natural gas. Yes, sir. He said, no, you misunderstand. He said, what I did is I signed this thing we're gonna conduct a study on the effects of LNG. I said, no, you're not, sir. You paused it. I know. I have the export terminals in my state. I talked to those people this morning. This is doing massive damage to our economy, national security. It occurred to me, Barry, he was not lying to me. He genuinely did not know what he had signed.
It's frightening. Now, folks say to me, why do you care, Tom? He's gone. Good riddance. But this is important. The effort of any group of people, especially leftist operatives, to turn the American presidency into a puppet show is a direct threat to the safety and the security and the survival of the republic. It plays into the hands of our enemies. Look, we know from the JFK files and other evidence that China and Russia have embedded operatives in our government. The Soviets started doing it in the 1930s. We may never know who was really in charge over those last 4 years.
That's Newsmax host and former member of the George W. Bush administration, Tom Basile, who went on to talk about China and Russia, communism, and today's Democratic Party, before ending with this.
I've long held that Biden's decline was obvious during the 2020 campaign and that Biden and the Biden family were repackaged for a one-term presidency that would provide a bridge to a new generation of left-wing leader. Political strategist turned Washington's serial grifter into Lunch Pail Joe. We heard about all those stories about commuting on Amtrak, even though a bunch of them were made up. We heard about Joe's upbringing in a half-Jewish, half-Hispanic, half-coal miners town in Pennsylvania somewhere. We heard all about the Joe Biden, who was a great family man, as the press attempted to discredit his son's crimes and his daughter's diary. Recently, Chuck Todd had the courage to reveal the ruse.
Joe Biden never should have been there in the first place, right? Number one, he shouldn't have run for president. Not one, not two, but three Biden children, and I count Bo's widow, were all dealing with drug problems in 2018. And Joe Biden said, now's a perfect time to run for president because who cares about our family? There's this mythology about Joe Biden that the man cared so much, it's all bull.
But the plan all went awry when, in a moment of lucidity, the president of the United States vowed to run for a second term. After pumping him full of drugs to keep up the appearance that he was actually in charge, now he's outlived his usefulness, apparently, and he could just be left to rot. Kind of reminds me of this, when former Chinese President Hu Jintao was led out of the Communist Party meeting. Nobody's seen him either since the operatives led him out of that room. Think about it, folks. If this is how Democrats treat one of their own leaders, what would they be willing to do to you and I?
That's Tom Basile, host of America Right Now, Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax. And right as Tom Basile and a lot of other people start asking, where the heck is Joe? A report from NBC News says Joe Biden and the former First Lady are considering getting out on the campaign trail to revive the party. And now that Chuck Todd isn't with NBC News anymore, on his podcast, I guess, he's going to start speaking more of the truth. All right, let's go back to Lydia Serrani now, who spoke with former U.S. Attorney and Newsmax contributor Joe DiGenova, whose name and personal information turned up in the 80,000 pages of the JFK files that were released last week.
So what private information of yours was released? What was your reaction to see your name listed in those newly released files?
Well, of course, I didn't realize they were going to release information from congressional committees, which had nothing to do with the assassination investigation itself. We were investigating on the Church Committee, which I was on in 1976. We were investigating assassination attempts by the CIA of foreign leaders and whether or not they had an effect on the assassination of President Kennedy. When they released these documents the other day, I was shocked to find out when I got a call from a reporter that they had listed the security clearance list of all the people on the committees, and I was on there, and on those lists were our names, date of birth, place of birth, and our social security numbers. Nobody had managed to redact our social securities number, which were of no interest whatsoever to the public, but are of great interest to crooks. It was utter incompetence by the people at the National Archives, and really completely unprofessional, and they broke the law. They broke the Privacy Act when they did it.
Unbelievable. Now, Social Security numbers were released. The administration said it would supply everyone who is still living with new Social Security numbers.
Well, that's ridiculous. Do you know what happens when you get a new Social Security number? You have to rebuild your entire financial and personal life in every conceivable way. It takes months. That is not an answer. That is not remediation. It's absolutely absurd to say you're going to give people new Social Security numbers. Believe me, anybody who suggested that has never been through an investigation where you see how starting a new Social Security number works. Believe me, nobody wants to go through that. The solution to this is you don't release this information. And what happened was it was clearly done hastily, and I am beginning to think that it was done purposely to embarrass President Trump, not to necessarily harm any one of us, which it clearly did, but to embarrass President Trump. And the fact is, the people who did this are going to pay. They are going to pay.
How are you going to make them pay? What do you mean?
I've retained counsel, and I intend to sue.
Oh, wow. Incredible. How are you involved I mean, you look like a young man. I mean, I'm sorry to be involved in this.
Well, first of all, I just celebrated my 80th birthday with all the folks at Newsmax. But here's what happened. I was a former assistant U.S. attorney in D.C., and I got a call from Howard Baker and John Tower to come up and work on the committee. And one of my assignments was to work on the assassination plots of the CIA against foreign leaders. And as part of that, we investigated the assassination of John Kennedy in order to see whether or not the CIA had anything to do with it, whether or not there was any foreign influence, which, of course, there was from Russia and others. And so that's how I got involved in it.
Have you received any threats?
Over the years, many threats. In fact, I've had to report many of them to the FBI. And who knows what's going to happen now? Fingers crossed. And, of course, the idiots who released this information could have cared less. I mean, the thoughtlessness, the carelessness involved in this is just absolutely unbelievable. But it is the government. And so what do you expect?
Former U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Joe DiGenova on Newsmax, who has had death threats over the years, which leads me to the weekend death of 43-year-old former U.S. Attorney Jessica Aber, who was found dead in her Virginia home on Saturday. Aber, who was appointed by President Biden and resigned in January as President Trump took office, was in charge of cases targeting leaks in the CIA and Russian nationals committing fraud in the United States. Wow. Does that sound dangerous, or is it just me? Joe DiGenova just referenced the CIA and Russians, right? Early reports said there were no signs of foul play and that Aber died of natural causes. I am not going to speculate without knowing more, but the state medical examiner will determine the official cause of death. Attorney General Pam Bondi posted on X, the loss of Jessica Aber is deeply tragic. Our hearts and prayers go out to her family and friends during this profoundly difficult time, again, from Attorney General Bondi. And former Congresswoman Mia Love, the first Republican black woman elected to Congress, died over the weekend as well. Love was only 49 years old. She had been battling brain cancer and died peacefully at her home in Utah, according to a statement from her family. She was originally from Brooklyn, New York. And let's go back to Friday night's Finnerty to wrap things up with another big weekend story. Disney strikes again.
The movie that nobody wanted to see, and I mean that seriously, nobody wants to see this movie. Ticket pre-sales are nowhere near what Disney was hoping for. Let's just say if you wanted to buy tickets for the 9 p.m. show tonight, wherever you are in America, you'd be just fine. But it finally hit theaters today, 3 years after it was filmed, 5 years after filming was supposed to start. Disney, despite losing over $1 billion on their last 4 movies, as they continue to shove woke politics into people's faces who just want to go to the movie, laugh, cry, and go home. Look, people don't want to be lectured when they're watching a movie, and they certainly don't want to be told that they're bad people. But that's what Disney continues to do. And the latest victim of really bad ideas is finally here. The magical Disney DEI woke equity version of the 1937 classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But because the word dwarves is now apparently controversial, Disney took that part out of the movie altogether. And now the movie is just called Snow White, which would be like Disney taking lions out of Lion King or mermaids out of The Little Mermaid. And not only are the dwarves gone in the remake, they've been replaced by what Disney is now calling magical creatures. Snow White and the Seven Magical Creatures. Disney wouldn't even cast people with actual dwarfism to play the roles of the 7 dwarves. And the new magical creatures are also completely computer generated. One actor with dwarfism saying, quote, "There really is nothing wrong casting someone with dwarfism as a dwarf as long as we are treated equally and with respect. We're usually more than happy to take on any acting roles that are suitable for us. Plus, it's an opportunity for young children to see someone with dwarfism, which they may never see before." Disney claims that they consulted the dwarfism community and decided that magical creatures was the way to go instead of casting people with actual dwarfism, which got a lot of people upset. And little people were actually protesting outside the very muted premiere of Snow White, the movie that no one wants to see. It turns out that Disney doesn't care about any of this. Snow White is being played by Rachel Ziegler, who doesn't really sound like she's ever bothered to actually watch the original 1937 movie. What's really interesting about this current Snow White is that conservatives aren't going to go see it because it's super woke, but liberals are saying the same thing for a much different reason. It's all because of Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen in the movie. Gadot is also apparently controversial because she is an Israeli who spent 2 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, a real-life Wonder Woman. She's obviously pro-Israel. And you might be wondering, wow, what's controversial about that? Well, in Hollywood, it's more popular to be anti-Israel. That's what those little pins mean right there. Those mean support Palestine and Hamas, instead of people who were actually attacked by terrorists on October the 7th.
And I'm Jewish, and we have had enough of Jew hatred. We will confront anti-Semitism, we will call it out, but we will never let it not only defeat us, but define us, because our love is stronger than their hate.
After that, Godot's co-star, Snow White herself, Rachel Ziegler, who we just showed you, tweeted this out, and always remember, free Palestine. What a nice message. She told Variety that I'm only responsible for what I feel, and then I'm responsible for how I act upon it, which makes no sense at all. So now, as the movie comes out, the 2 biggest stars in this movie can't stand each other to the point where they can't be in the same room, which forced Disney, in their infinite wisdom, to cut back on doing a formal premiere. This movie's cost them $200 million and counting. And instead of America being excited to take their families, I've got kids, we'd normally be excited to go see the remake of Bashful, Doc, Dopey, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, and Sneezy. Disney is looking at another woke flop with magical creatures instead of dwarves in a movie about 7 dwarves.
Magical creatures seems like it would have more of a bad effect on little kids than little people would. Dwarfs are part of life, a part of the world. What the hell is a magical creature? That would freak me out if I was a kid. The headline in today's New York Times, the New York Times, says Disney's Snow White has a sleepy box office start. The LA Times says Snow White opens with a lackluster $43 million. All right, President Trump is meeting with the governor of Louisiana at the White House today. The two will, of course, answer questions from the press pool, so we will see that. There'll be a lot of updates throughout the day, as I mentioned, about what's happening in Saudi Arabia as far as the Russian-Ukraine war. There are developments out of the Middle East as well. President Trump will then be participating in a Greek Independence Day celebration at the White House. Greek Independence Day is actually tomorrow. The president's attorneys will be back in court today with Judge Boasberg for the legal battle over those deportation flights of the Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. And happy Monday. Wall Street started the new week well into the green this morning. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up over 400 points at the open. There is some economic data and earnings on tap again this week, notably Dollar Tree earnings, which will be looked at as a pulse of the economy or a pulse of the consumer. Tesla shares up more than 6% in pre-market this morning. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were in the green as well. At the time of this recording, Bitcoin is over $87,000. Make sure you keep up with all of the news and breaking developments throughout the day on Newsmax N2 and at Newsmax.com. Also, make sure you have the Newsmax app on your phone so you can stay up to date anywhere, anytime. It all starts each and every morning with Wake Up America, followed by National Report, Bianca De La Garza with Newsline, all the way through Rob Schmidt tonight. Finnerty at 8, Greg Kelly reports at 9, and much, much more, with expert analysis from people like political analyst Mark Halpern, Senator Santorum, foreign policy expert Fred Fleitz, Professor Dershowitz, Judge Napolitano, and many, many others. I'm Tony Marino. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Newsmax Daily. Please continue to share it with your friends and family as we need to grow the community. Indulge in a cheesesteak. You have an excuse. And keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.